Welcome back to LaunchPod. Today we sit down with serial entrepreneur Michele Romanow to learn about what it takes to come up with great ideas, how to recover from failure, and why the decision to exit is as personal as the choice to have a baby. Michele explores her entrepreneurial journey with her friend and next alumni, Daniel Rodic, who recently joined Clearbanc as head of market development. He'll share some inside observations on what makes Clearbanc a great place to work and what Michele does to make sure the culture scales as they experience rapid growth. A special thank you to the team at Clearbanc for making this episode possible and for funding founder dreams around the world.
Michele, thanks so much for doing this.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's I always like when I get to be interviewed by people that have known me for a long time, and we've known each other for almost 10 years probably.
Yeah.
So Dan can keep me really accountable here when he says something that he's like, nah, maybe that wasn't quite the story. So
It's funny you bring that up because I was trying to think through when we had first originally met.
Yeah.
And so the first memory I have of kind of meeting you in person was some dinner that someone had put on. And I remember I swear to God, it was some day that some fire was definitely happening in your life, as it always is when building a company.
A lot of fires.
Yeah. But when I actually thought about it, I don't know if you know this story, but my first ever exposure to the name Michele Romanow before, you're all these things that everyone knows you today.
Yeah.
I was in university and I loved doing case competitions. That was like my thing. And I remember applying to something at Queen's and the case study I had to do to kind of get into the competition was, what's this random caviar company? And,
no way.
And I did this whole case study and I didn't realize Evandale Caviar was a real company because I'm used to doing case studies of like, here's this thing about Boeing jets or whatever.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
that was the company we started.
And I'm like, that's such a random thing to do a case study on.
Yeah.
And then fast forward 5 years later, I think after that we met. And then I learned, I'm like, oh my God, that's actually where I met Michele Romanow and heard the story and all that. And I'm like, that's exactly what I did in the case study. It's your story.
Do you want to know something even crazier? So that case study, how that came about was such a crazy story. So the short story is, we, in our last year of school, we're like determined to be entrepreneurs. We brainstorm tons of different ideas, finally figuring out the worldwide supply of sturgeon caviar is down by 95% because we have overfished the Caspian Sea. So we do all this research, we build out this business plan, we actually win a bunch of the business plan competitions. So we won, $100,000 in prize money, which is the only thing that gave us the confidence to say no to all of our job offers. We move out to the East Coast and we literally build a fishery from scratch, exactly as the case is, right? Like boats, fishermen, my hands knee deep in fish, the whole 9 yards. And, finish the summer season. We're selling to all these high-end restaurants. We're like, great, we've created this awesome business. And then damn, we're in the fall of 2008 in the biggest recession of the last 70 years. And I am 21 years old selling the world's most superfluous luxury product. This is bad timing. So what a lot of people know that part of the story, what they don't know is now we're scrambling. We're we have no ideas. We can't keep selling caviar. There's no way that this is going to keep happening. And so this amazing professor, Elspeth Murray at the business school is like, why don't I pay you? I think it was I don't remember. It was $10,000 or $15,000 to write down this case. And I remember thinking this was my guardian angel. Someone would pay me to write down this story that, now tons of these kids have seen. But it was one of these incredible acts of kindness in my life where someone at the point where I was really down, took the time to really help us. And I still remember Anatole and I went back to Queens and we wrote the story.
That's amazing. And what do you think it was about your relationship with her? I'm sure they meet lots of students and great people but what do you think, what were the, things you did leading up to that thinking back made you think that she felt comfortable, throwing you that lifeline that all of us have needed in our lives?
I remember basically cold calling her. I mean, the cold call version was I had to knock on her door as a professor and I was like, I'm in the engineering faculty. I heard you were the one to talk to if you wanted to be an entrepreneur. And she's like, wow, this is pretty bold. And, I think she was just, we were pretty determined. And I think there's a lot of people that talk about starting a business and there's far fewer people who are willing to roll up their sleeves. I mean, this was a gritty, scrappy business. We were in we were covered in like fish guts.
You literally
day.
actually like rolled up your
sleeve. Like this was a literal roll up. I mean, we all stayed in the same motel room. And I remember like we smelled like fish every day and we didn't have a window that opened. Like it couldn't have been a worse scenario for like, you know, how kind of scrappy this was in the early days. And so I think ultimately like you should ask her. I don't think she had seen that many entrepreneurs that were crazy enough to do that. And I've always really appreciated that lifeline.
What do you think was about the folks that you ended up working with to start that business? Like what originally brought you together to work together on coming up with ideas? How'd you guys all meet?
Yeah. So this is crazy because Anatoly and I were in civil engineering together. And he comes up to me one day in class and he's like, yo, what are you working on? And I'm like, oh, I'm doing this like business plan competition for the Tea Room, which is this little business I started in undergrad, this coffee shop on campus. And he's like, oh, why are you doing this? I was like, oh, because if you win, you get like a $25,000 check. He's like, oh, that's crazy. We should like do that next year. And so he was actually the one that assembled the team. And he found Ryan and he's like, look, this is the smartest guy in Eng Chem. And like, let's, spend a bunch of time brainstorming together. And that's literally what we did. We spent all of our time playing what's the next $1 million idea. Like we would book group rooms every time that we would go drinking. It was like we just kept brainstorming different ideas. And there was nothing that was like, we didn't have these filters where it's like, oh, this has to be big enough or this. We just were like very determined and then, randomly stumbled upon this caviar business, Googled what the state of caviar was, figured out that worldwide supply was down. Like it all kind of, tumbled into one another.
And what I find so interesting is that, you guys, so Evandale, 2008, not a great time to sell caviar.
Not a great time.
The business didn't go where you hoped it would go. You kind of all go somewhat your separate ways professionally, but you end up, coming back together to build Bytopia.
Yeah.
And so, there's lots of people who will listen to this who are probably going through building their first or second company.
Yeah.
I was just literally on a call actually with someone who's like, I don't know, I think that my business is going to go anywhere.
Right.
What should I do? And it's like, oh, maybe there's something there, maybe not, but you can explore whether it's getting a job, starting something new, whatever. How did you maintain that relationship with your co-founders from that business to the point where you felt comfortable going back in together again to start Bytopia? Like what was the interactions between Evandale and Bytopia that kept you guys together?
Yeah, I mean, so kind of, it's like the fall of 2008, where like the world is not going in a great place. And we're trying to figure out if we should start this business again or do another version of it. We start playing with other ideas. I remember we have been relentless in our career about trying new ideas. Like I think it's hard to appreciate how many things we tried that didn't work until I list them all out for you, because it's so easy to like list the highlight reel. It's like, oh, Bytopia went well and Snap Saves went well and Clearbanc is going well. But like, I mean, in 2008, like I remember...
Give me like top 10. What are the top 10 things that...
Oh, that didn't work?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. we were looking at like the water heater rental business. So I remember like doing a stint selling water heaters door to door, learning about like how people were financing all of these home upgrades. That was like a project we did. We were looking at how to reopen the fishery. We were looking at, oh, this is a good one, City Fruit. I made the website, I made everything. We were selling fruit to offices because offices were literally just starting to do snacks. And I remember knocking door to door being like, would your office like fruit? And we will deliver you a box of fruit every week for your thing. This is a true story. I built the whole website. And it was so funny because ended up not working out. And I remember never checking this like cityfruit.ca domain. And a year later I check it and it's like McKinsey is inquiring about could they get fruit from us and all of these things. Oh yeah, City Fruit. You should ask my sisters. They'll remember all of these iterations that we did. And so we're trying a lot of things. And then finally by the end of 2009, I was like, we got a crappy market. Like, we don't really have an idea that's working. We're now 22 years old. We're running through the rest of, the money that we had to write this case. So we all end up looking at jobs. And I remember Ryan went back to school and, Anatoly got a corporate job and I got this director of strategy role at Sears. And, it was a great job and I was super grateful for it at the time because this was like very scary to be in the middle of a recession and be unemployed. And, I'm working, Sears at the time when I showed up in 2010 was the largest e-commerce retailer in Canada, if you can believe it. And I mean, they should have been the largest e-commerce retailer in Canada today because they had pick and pack merchandising, 50 years before anyone else, right? Like the hard part of Amazon is not building the Amazon front end. The hard part is, making sure I can deliver a black pen plus a blue t-shirt plus a washing machine in one order, which Sears had been doing with the catalog business for years.
Decades.
And anyway, so I got to see like e-commerce blow up. And seeing that, I remember we were constantly just staying in touch. I mean, we had such a close experience building this business together, then attempting to build a bunch of other different businesses. And so we were just, every time we saw something interesting that was happening in the news or whatever, we were like, oh, have you seen this? Like, should we look at this? And it was at the end of that year where we're like, look, e-commerce is blowing up. We should look at starting an e-commerce website. And Daily Deals were just starting. And we thought it was time to take another kick at the can.
So we can talk a bit about Bytopia, which is interesting. But the part I really want to focus on is kind of on this theme of ideation.
Yeah.
So everyone, we've heard the Bytopia story, but what's interesting is the business that came out of that was SnapSaves.
Yeah.
And that's the business you end up selling to Groupon. And I'd say from public perception, that's the first big win of your career that then leads to everything else.
Yeah.
How did that work internally? Because it's something we struggled with even in my company and right now we're trying to do this at Clearbanc.
Yeah.
And the story of Clearbanc is a version of this. Like, how did you incubate an idea like SnapSaves and execute on it fairly well when you already had something in Bytopia that was also working? You were generating money, you were acquiring other businesses.
Yeah.
Maybe can you start from the beginning of like where did the idea of SnapSaves come?
Yeah.
And then what were the signals that you first saw to say, hey, this is actually a thing?
Yeah.
And then and then how did you functionally support it to execute on it to get it to where it was?
And it's a really good story because like Bytopia was never a terrible business, right? Like e-commerce, made a lot of sense. It was just super competitive. So you're constantly looking for businesses that have higher margins and don't have some of these crazy competitive pressures that you're at when you're selling, goods and services, especially when you're selling them at a discount, right? But even today, I mean, Bytopia is still like, I mean, they're now a merged commerce. There's, they've rolled up 10 different companies. Like there's tons of, it's actually been a really reasonable success story. So while we were doing it, again, all we could think about is like, this is a really margin compressed business because we have a lot of competition right now. And how can we build some defensibility or different product lines that look a little bit more like SaaS revenue that can be a little bit different? And so we were experimenting with products from the very beginning. I mean, we built an entire scheduling software system that would have been like the equivalent of like MindBody, where we would like, that was like a big build. We built all the software. We actually had 100 merchants on board that were using our software. So this wasn't like a like tiny little company. And it was effectively like open table for everyone but restaurants. So if you wanted to book, yoga studio classes and hair appointments and basically all of the merchants we were selling to on Daily Deals, we're like, oh, we can also sell them booking software so they can book all of these customers they have in and, build a CRM. And honestly, I think it was just, we just couldn't make it work. Like 100 customers on board. It's not like we made a really reasonable attempt at that. We're like, oh, that didn't work. So then the next thing I remember we tried to build one of the early competitors to Uber Eats. And so I remember we literally hired the drivers ourselves. We had receipt printers and almost 100 restaurants again. Like these were not like small projects. We built all the software and that business was one that was especially like the margins are so thin. And unless you own the fleet yourselves, it's really hard. This is like the next product that like, and I think if anyone takes anything away from this story, it's like you got to fail a lot of times to be successful. And you got to put a lot of energy into all of these companies.
Just so we have context, like let's, even starting from the fruit website to like these more complex builds of like a receipt printer and like what were the typical timeframes for these experiments or like how long would it take you? It's like, oh, I'm going to start an Uber Eats competitor. How long did it take you to get something to market?
We were trying to like get things out the door in like 3 to 6 months and we were trying to use as little money as possible. So probably between like 10K and 50K on most of them. And, we were feeding them slowly. So we were taking some of the revenue from our Bytopia business and being like, oh, let's fund these other projects. We were doing a lot of them off the side of our desks. And then we, we'd be like, okay, we got to sell this, Uber Eats competitor. Now I need to take a salesperson and like get them selling to restaurants and see what that works out. So we take little resources at a time. After that, we started working on, we actually remember seeing what you guys were doing at Loose Button. We're like, oh, the Birchbox model, like, can we start talking to CPGs? Is there a better way to distribute samples? Like, let's look at that. that was like really complicated, largely because like shipping rates in Canada are super complicated. I mean, this could be a whole podcast into of itself on why this is so challenging. But it was from that experience of talking to CPGs where it's like this is absurd. We, deliver $100 billion worth of physical paper coupons in the US that we randomly mail to people's house with no data. And then, there is an enormous amount of fraud in this business. There's so many things. And so then we were like, okay, well, what if we could digitize this process and see what that looked like? And I remember, I designed, the logo and the original screenshots for SnapSaves, like the shelves. Our original app had these like really cool 3D shelves. And like, I remember I built those myself. And literally it was just one of those things where, as we started talking to companies, we could leverage our assets, right? So we could take our Bytopia user base and drive them to download the app. And so we weren't starting from the ground up, but it was like one of those things where it just started to work. So unlike the other businesses where things had been really difficult, here we were seeing a lot of traction with CPGs. We were seeing budgets be a lot bigger. We were seeing that our solution was truly very differentiated. I mean, even a basic amount of data was totally revolutionary to what they had before on these transactions. And so, we just really focused. Facebook was just building out digital app downloads. And so we were able to use that tool super effectively in the early days. And then, Groupon showed up and they're like, wow, you guys have figured out the next generation of couponing. Like, we want to buy this company. So yeah, that was kind of the story behind that.
And so when it started picking up traction,
yeah.
So, this is kind of the birth story of my company at Exact, where it's like we were running this loose button Luxbox, and you said it was not a great business model in Canada for sure. And we started seeing traction, and we ended up dividing up our team to go execute on this idea. How did you set it up? So how did you, for you personally, how did you pick, am I spending my time on Bytopia or am I spending time on SnapSaves? What happens to the rest of my team?
Yeah.
Because Bytopia didn't die. It's still a thriving business. So at that moment, how did you divide and conquer?
Yeah.
How did you decide that?
It was like a real work in progress, right? It was, Ryan effectively was core to the Bytopia business. Anatoly was full-time on the SnapSaves business, and I split my time in both ways. And so, I did a lot of early selling to the CPGs. I did a lot of I ran our whole product business at Bytopia at the same time. I remember it was just a lot. When you go through these sprint periods where you're trying to figure out something, it is really stressful, and there's no perfect way to do that. But, and we had to fight a lot. Anatoly will remember there was a lot of times where I'm like, this side project is taking so much money and so much time, and this could kill both of these companies. Yeah. You were really leveraging it all to make this work. And so I think, I don't have a perfect answer to that. You're just trying to do as much as you can and be pretty focused on how can I move the needle on this new business, but make sure that the fundamentals of the old business are going to be here.
I think that's always the struggle, because you don't want to kill what's working, but then you also can't live on that forever, because at some point, you're going to get killed by someone out innovating you. Right?
The most important thing is you can never lie to yourself. Mm-hmm. I really mean that. And it's really hard for entrepreneurs because we sell all day. Just think about that. We sell all day long. We're selling for investors to come join us. We're selling for, talent to come join us. We're selling partnerships. And so it's very, very easy to start, believing your own story. And that's not to say that you should sell and you should be putting the best version of the story and you should be doing that. But you can never believe your own bullshit. You have to sit there and be like, does this business have real defensibility going forward? Can this be easily replicated and copied? Because if it can, and you've created a good model, it certainly will be. And the less you can lie to yourself, the more you can be like, this is really important for us to build. Mm-hmm. And I think with e-commerce, we always knew that is going to be a highly competitive business. But with the SnapSaves business, we could build a lot more moats in what we were doing for a bunch of different reasons. And so I think that's, you're playing for that long-term defensibility, but you also have to understand, it's this fundamental e-commerce business that's feeding you. Mm-hmm. And constantly thinking about those are what I am doing all the time as a founder is how do we build more and more defensibility into our models?
And then so with the Groupon acquisition, what were kind of the signals you saw where you had built a certain amount of defensibility, a certain amount of scale, but you must have seen something to say, it made sense to sell this business now versus I'm just going to go build and compete against Groupon because I have the thing they want. Yeah. And I have Bytopia, which is essentially Groupon in at least the Canadian market.
Yeah.
What were the signals that you saw at that point that made you say, the right move here is to sell to Groupon versus let's just go raise another round of capital. Let's try to compete. Let's try to win.
Yeah.
Because I've seen entrepreneurs make, both calls, and sometimes they're right calls, sometimes they're wrong calls.
Yeah.
I'm just curious what your thought process was looking back.
I think this is like the decision to sell your company or not is kind of like the decision to have a baby or not. It's like the most highly personal decision you will make. And it always bothers me when like people are like, oh, Canadians sell their companies too early and like blah, blah, blah. Like this is so personal. I think at the end of the day, like we had been grinding for 8 years at this point. So this is like a long time to be running a bootstrapped company. It's like, we've done this caviar thing. We've lived through a recession. We ran Bytopia for 3 years. We now finally have this thing that's working. And the partnership with Groupon made a lot of sense. Like this wouldn't have made sense with a lot of other companies, but like they had the exact demographic and the database we were looking for. Like they understood they didn't have a business with CPGs. We were coming as that arm. And like we had a real relationship with, the founder who was like, this makes sense for us. And so I think it's all of those pieces of data that's really encouraging you to do that. But I think it's where you are, it's where the companies are, it's how exhausted the team was. Like there was a bunch of things there where this was the right decision at that time. Mm-hmm. And I don't always want to be too prescriptive because you actually have the best data internally as a founder. You have a real sense of like, have you capped out your market size? Like, are your margins going to be compressed? What are competitors doing? And look, there's lots of big players in the coupon space, to be honest. Like there's, most of them, right? Like News America had bought a competitor. Like this was going to heat up and this was not going to be like VC dollars fighting. It was going to be some big incumbents playing. And so you have to look at all those dynamics and you have to be like, look, is this the hill I want to die on? And the other thing is you have to really do the math on, as soon as you even raise a Series A, like for the founders to make any real money at that point, like this company needs to be selling for like 40, 50, $60 million. And like when you're raising a Series A, you have like, I don't know, a couple $1 million in revenue, maybe if you're in really good shape. Like that's really scary. And you should be really aware of like the risk that you're taking there. And so I think weighing those risks is really important, right? We don't talk enough about founder dilution and what that means at the end of the day. Like it was revolution. It was groundbreaking for my career, frankly, because we had, the three of us owned a third of this company each. And then we had like our ESOP pool on top of that. So effectively, like, you basically own a little less than a third. Like, again, you mentioned like that was totally life-changing in my career. And that would have been totally different if we had raised a Series A and taken a huge amount of dilution and had to pay out the investors first. And so I think it's a really good thing for first steps. And then once you have one exit, you can play such bigger leagues the second time over because you just have a lot more credibility in going forward and doing so.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's a pattern I've observed if you look at any of the iconic entrepreneurs that people look up to, whether it's like a Tony Hsieh or Elon Musk or Mark Cuban. Yeah. Their first wins were still quite significant, but relative to what they're building today, they're small. Like Elon Musk sold his first company heavily diluted, right, for a few $100 million, which is impressive by, I guess, Canadian standards, but relative to what he's doing with SpaceX and Tesla and all that, it's like really not much. Yeah. Right. And Mark Cuban, same thing, sold his company for a few $1 million, then sold his big business after that. Yeah. Tony Hsieh sold his like LinkShare business and then became an investor, started Zappos, sold that for, or took over Zappos and sold that for $1 billion. And it's all this like you've gotten this base of safety and security to say like, I can just go for massive wins because if it doesn't go anywhere, it's like, I can try again. I can try again.
But like when you started, I mean, like we started as entrepreneurs at the beginning of our career, right? It wasn't like we had these huge, we had worked for investment banks or consulting firms and had saved up a bunch of money and had like a real safety net. Like this was like, we were grinding. And it was like, there were lots of really tough days. I actually remember the winter of like 2012. I ended up getting whooping cough. So most people are vaccinated against whooping cough. Your vaccine wears out. And for some reason, my vaccine wore out. It wasn't at the top of my mind as an entrepreneur to check which of my vaccines had worn out at the age of, 24, 25, whatever I was. And whooping cough is the worst. You basically cough uncontrollably for 90 days. Like you feel so sick. It was the first time in my life I was like, I may never get better. And I remember I just like had to come to work every day. Like I had spent so much time building this company. If I didn't show up, the company was not going to make it. And I was like, wow, this is like the feeling of being stuck. And so you have some like really tough days as an entrepreneur where you're like, I'm the only person that can solve this problem. And we didn't have the money to, find a replacement. And it was just like an impossible body of knowledge to like totally transfer over. It just felt overwhelming at times. And so I think, it was 100% the right move to sell. And I don't think anyone should view that. I think that having some early wins in your career is an amazing way to then try and take on big risks and big problems later. And that's not to say you can take on, you can't take on big risks and big problems, but it gives you a real personal safety net to do that.
Mm-hmm. On this idea of ideation, I wanted to kind of fast forward then. So company sells to Groupon, you're at Groupon, leave, and then Clearbanc gets started.
Yeah.
It doesn't start on what Clearbanc is now known for today, is funding e-commerce companies. And you can correct me if I'm wrong on the story, but from what I also understand, the idea of funding e-commerce companies was like not looked at as a good idea when it first came up, and now it's the foundation of everything we see here.
Yeah.
So maybe you can put us at that point of like, at this point you're, I think, funding Airbnb hosts.
Yeah.
So it's Uber drivers first, then Airbnb hosts.
Yeah.
Then Tanai comes up with this idea of like, we should just fund e-commerce companies. Do you remember like what that initial conversation was like and what the reservations were from your end as to?
Oh, yeah. I mean, let's look back. Andrew and I, when we started this company, were like, look, fintech is going to change banks. And there is a brand new economy that is growing that banks really don't understand. And so I think we were kind of seeing, Andrew had been an early investor in Wealthsimple. We were seeing all these new like fintech ideas. And we're like, that feels like the right stream to choose. This is one of the first principles of being an entrepreneur is you have to not be paddling upstream. Like you have to choose a business and a stream that's growing because it makes your whole life so much easier. So that was like where we were like, look, I saw e-commerce, I saw, the coupon space, I saw a bunch of that, I saw a lot of ad tech, but like fintech is going to be pretty cool here. So it's kind of our first decision. And then we were like, well, how is the economy changing? And, gig work was a big part of how this shift looked in 2015. So, and I want to make sure I illustrate these correctly. Like these were big projects we took on. Like we helped, Uber build the driver side API. We built a financing product for all of their drivers. Like this wasn't just like, oh, we ran like a little experiment. Like we really built a whole company around this and just, couldn't get critical traction of the product. At this point, we're like, okay, well, Airbnb. And what it really was is that when you give an Uber driver money, they can't scale their business. As an Uber driver, you can't drive 2 cars at once, which is kind of the thing. But as an Airbnb host, you could build multiple properties at once. And you could really scale with capital, which could unlock things for you. And so, we started looking at how do we help, hosts grow their businesses. And this wasn't a small experiment. I mean, I think we put, $25 million into the market.
For Airbnb.
For Airbnb.
Yeah.
Like this was not just like, oh, we just like had an idea. This, we raised our Series A on this. And it was a combination of a bunch of things. It was the fact that on Dragon's Den, I was seeing a lot of these deals where like you're seeing founders give up such a huge percent of their company. And you're like, this is all going towards ad spend. We were looking at e-commerce was growing. It was like Andrew that had the original thread. And to be honest, I was super negative on that because think about it. I had run an e-commerce store. I had watched so many e-commerce companies go bankrupt because so many of them completely outspent. You know what I mean? So you raise a bunch of money. You're like, oh, we should just acquire customers for $100 each and we'll sell them a $50 product. But don't worry, they'll buy 4 things from us in the next year. And so we'll break even. That is terrible math. That math always ends in tears every single time. You have to have positive unit economics. And we'll always return to this principle. And so I remember being like, I think my line was like, all of these guys will go bankrupt at the end of the day. Like, we're going to lose all of our money here. And so, Andrew's like, well, I don't think so. And so we came up with some of our original, like, underwriting criteria at that point, like that you needed, a certain amount of time in business, that, drop shippers had a higher propensity to go bankrupt than companies that had branded and built their own products. And that makes total sense. Like, there's one day where you can just wake up and you're like, I don't want to order any more products and resell them. And so that's a much that's a much easier business to abandon than one where you've built your own brand around that. But like, make no mistake, I was not keen on this. But that being said, I always believe in testing because ultimately, like if you just build products for yourself, it's a super. So I knew I would use this product, right? Like at Bytopia, we would 100% use capital that was non-dilutive like this. I was just worried about our risk on actually providing this capital. And so Tanai, has a startup. He's like, okay, I want another adventure. We're like, okay, come and like, why don't you test this? And it was crazy. I still remember like our very first company, this company that did murder mystery subscription boxes. This guy is an ex-military veteran out of Baltimore. He has this great idea to, make a box that gets delivered to you every month where you can run a murder mystery party, right? Like the handwritten love letters, like all of these little things. Unit economics look good. It's like, okay, we'll give you 10 grand to spend on marketing. And this is such a good story because this guy today, has, kind of a $20 million plus business. He owns 100% of it. And it's a pretty incredible story.
So you fund that first business, but I don't imagine then all of a sudden you're like, okay, yeah, we gave someone $10,000. This is working. What were the kind of subsequent data points that told you, like in Exacta's example, when that business started for us, it was like, let's see if I can sell sampling in a different way. And we closed a contract for like $100,000. That's okay. Yeah. We closed another one for $300,000. I'm like, that's a bit better. Yep. And then like just sheer luck, we closed this like $1 million contract. So in 90 days, we've done like $1 million in bookings. We're like, oh, okay. Yeah. That works. And then that point, we're like, let's pivot, build this thing. Right. What was that version for you that's like, you know what, we're going to place a bet on e-commerce versus all the other things that were, already Airbnb was worth $25 million is not insignificant amount of money. Yeah.
And, I don't want to underestimate how hard it is to make these decisions because it is never clear. It is only ever clear 6 months later. As you're in the thicket of the data is never totally conclusive. It doesn't look great. I think that, some of the things that we were seeing were the quality of the data we were getting was higher in e-commerce companies. And so if you're using, just data, like one of the big hallmarks of Clearbanc is that we've never given capital out on personal credit score, just because I fundamentally never believed that was related to your business, right? If, you paid your cell phone bill on time 3 years ago, that's not related to if your Airbnb property is going to go well. And it's certainly not related to if your e-commerce business is going to go well. But that's actually what's being done. And I
probably don't pay my credit card bill so I can build my company.
Exactly. So it actually may be inversely correlated, which is, anyway. But literally, you laugh, but every single small business lender and every single bank, that's what they use to adjudicate small businesses. And then they know that they're wrong a lot of the time. So they say, well, and then if your business can't pay me back, I have access to your personal assets, which is a personal guarantee, which is a horribly nasty thing in my worst days as an entrepreneur. Even when I had whooping cough, I was not like, it is time to go take out a personal guarantee and take out capital to run this business. And so I think that what we were seeing was the data sources were way stronger coming out of e-commerce. We could have a lot more trust in the data, whereas like data from vacation rental platforms was harder to get really clear data on what was happening. That was one thing that really mattered to us. How well we could find our customers and how deep the market was another thing. Like it's the classic things you're looking for. It just is not totally apparent at the time because you have things that are working. And I remember, even our advisors were like, I don't know, you shouldn't do this. But when Andrew and I made this decision, it was not like we were half in, half out. We said, look, the data is better on e-commerce and we are pivoting the whole company to do this. And that was super important because when you divide resources, it becomes really challenging and you always produce this like team A fighting team B. And some of that competitive tension could be really good, but not in the case where we knew that one product was really superior to one another. And so, then like literally the rest is history. That was 18 months ago. I mean, last year, I don't know, we put $750 million into 2,000 different companies. Like it's crazy the amount of scale we've been able to achieve since then.
So I think that's the other part that's impressed me. So my whole career up until now is I've, been overseeing a team, my team's never got much over 20, 25 people. Yep. There's a certain culture you have and a certain vibe you have, a team like that, the speed at which you can move, the closeness of everyone. And what's amazed me being part of the team here at Clearbanc is that somehow at 10, we're at 200 something people, and who knows how many more by the time this thing airs. I feel like my life hasn't changed in in that aspect. Like,
That's
I still
so
feel
good.
like I'm at a startup.
Yeah.
I still feel like we have freedom to do things. I still feel, I still don't know everyone's name. There's so many people here, but I still feel as close as I can to people like that. And I just feel like, oh, I'm just like selling a new product, but nothing else really in my life has changed dramatically. And I mean, in the best way possible.
Yeah.
What are some of the, again, thinking backwards, maybe starting from the leadership team that you brought on, like, what are some of the either coaching or prompts or things that you kind of put thought into that you think has kept this startup vibe and the best elements of a small team at a company that 5x'd its team in 6 months and will probably like double the size of the team in another 12 months?
Yeah. First of all, it's amazing that, like, to say that, right? That we've been able to maintain and keep that culture. I think it's a couple of things. The first is that, our vision for Clearbanc is to be the company that was built by founders for founders. And like Andrew and I are fundamentally founders at our core. As much as I was hesitant about the risk of this product, I was never hesitant that founders would want this product. I would have certainly used my own product 10 times over. And I deeply understood how difficult it was to raise money, how unfair the terms of some of that capital could be, how there were very few options, how very few of them were data-driven, and how the equity raising process itself is like, you do 6 to 12 months of meetings, and sometimes you just get crappy term sheets at the end of it. And so I totally understood that need. And one of the things that we wanted to do, and I think it's in many ways, one of the weaknesses of the human mind is that it's actually very difficult to have empathy for anything unless you've experienced it yourself. I mean, we can say as many days, like, imagine and walk a mile in his shoes and like read a book, but like, come on. And so until you've been in a war-torn country, you have no idea what it's like to be in a war-torn country. Like, I would never pretend to have that experience I didn't have. And I think the same applies to like understanding your customer. Until you've been a founder, it is really hard to understand what it's like to be a founder. It is really hard to understand that like the world owes you nothing, that you are, you feel like you're pressed against the wall all the time. Everyone's like, oh, you work for yourself, but then you have a group of employees that are like, at times, at the worst case scenario, holding you hostage for what they want in this. And you're like, I'm not working for myself, I'm working for you. Anyway, you have all these like moments as a founder that are frustrating and hard. And so we just kind of said, I don't even know how we got to this, but we're like, we have to hire founders because founders get other founders. And the founders that had shown up, Tanai was an ex-founder. He had tried to build, a business that connected e-commerce sellers on Etsy and help them, build content for them. And so he had totally got it and was one of the most successful people that we brought onto the team. One of the cool things that we've done at Clearbanc is like, if you come here, it doesn't matter if you came day 1 or day 90 or, 2 years in, if you made an incredible contribution here, we believe that you should be a co-founder. So we actually said like, 2 years in tonight, you're a co-founder as well. And so I think that was, back to your question, that was one of the biggest things is we hired a lot of other founders and that kept the culture of like, everyone needs to keep this level of like, we're all a little bit scrappy. We all need to solve problems on our own. We're all pretty independent thinkers. And that was a huge part of, I think, maintaining culture. I think the second thing that we did is, Andrew and I, at some point, we were like, look, people are coming to us all the time and they're basically complaining about other people in the company. They're like, I can't work with this person because I'm having this problem. And you kind of become, somewhere between you're like a glorified high school teacher, right? You're solving these interpersonal challenges. And I would say this about even the best people is like you get these conflicts. And, we've really got the team around this idea of radical candor, which is that, first of all, to tell someone the truth is much harder than lying to them or not saying anything else. And you need to have these conversations. We need to build the norm at Clearbanc that when you have a problem with someone, like Dan, if I have a problem with you, I have to come talk to you. And if I go talk to like Susie over there, Susie needs to look at me and he goes, let's both go talk to Dan about this. And, it was so funny, but this ended up being a huge unlock for the company. Like I would say the number of conflicts that I got involved at were like an absolute fraction of what was happening before because you're empowering your team to solve their own problems. And, the first thing you'll figure out is when you have these conversations, it's like 90% of the things in the workplace are miscommunications. Like you just see it all the time. We come from different places and different backgrounds. We don't all have the same language that we can even talk to each other with. So you can solve so many problems that way. And then you can figure out the couple of things that you really do need to work out. And so I think that was a second part. But I mean, maybe I'll turn it back on you. I mean, what do you think we did from the outside in that you've noticed here that like has worked?
I think it's certain amount of empowerment to leaders.
Yeah.
Like after you and Andrew and the co-founding team, everyone seems to have pretty good autonomy to manage their teams how they
100%.
want.
Yep.
And I think part of that is some element of safety of just like, hey, we all know we're here to build something interesting. There's a chance that you're going to make the wrong call, and like that's okay. Like, how can we just learn from it and move from it? And I sense there's a certain degree of safety. And the other part of it, and I guess I'm not as intimate with like how the specific conversations have been for every single human we've brought in here, but there's just something about, I can't really think of one person I run into here of just like, oh, I don't want to spend any time with you. Which it's like, I've made my own hiring decisions in my own life of just like, oh yeah, like this was a mistake. And so far, I mean, I haven't been here for too long. I haven't run into a person here being like, oh, if I see you in the elevator, I'm just going to like take the long route around.
Yeah.
But that happens in so many other places.
Totally.
And so I can't give you here's the thing that I've noticed, but that's the observation of like, or I rather can't say like, what have you done to do that? But there's something of whether it's cultural or personality or like the way people kind of interact and talk. Everyone just, I think I told you my first day or two here was just like, I just feel very loved by everyone. Just like, and no one really knows who I am here. And it's just like instant, like, yeah, we're all here together. How do we help? How do we?
And I think that's a little bit of hiring. Like we really want to hire people that want to be here. And, I'll give you two other ideas on hiring that I think have been powerful. The first is that like, I think one of the best questions you can ask people is like, what's the adventure you want in the next year of your life? And making sure that adventure matches what this company is going to look like. And again, the adventures at Clearbanc looked very different, whether you were employee 10 here or employee 50 here or employee 200 here. But, if you're ready for, I want to do more thinking and have like a bit more of a chill year, like Clearbanc is not the adventure for you. This company is going to change and iterate 6 times over before December of this year. So in 12 months from now. And matching that, I think, is how you get people that really want to be here and are really bought into like, can the company give you what you can give to the company? Because it's that match that creates magic when people, want to be here, right? We all have days where like, you get in and then it's like 10 hours later and you're like, where did my whole day go? But those are actually the great days of joy where it's like, I love doing this. There was not a single day that I like looked at the clock, right? This was all really fun to me. And then the other thing that I think about is, the other thing that is important with hiring is that you're hiring, and I call it like locus control. Like, do you believe you're happening to the world or the world is happening to you? And there's a bunch of things you can do to kind of suss this out in an interview. But generally people where they are happening to the world, they are natural problem solvers. They have figured out, where can they add value? How can they figure things out? And that I think produces a team that feels far more interesting. And the other thing is we just try and do things where we like break the ice. Like I always tell people, like, if you see someone in the kitchen, the most awkward day to not say hi to them, the least awkward day is today. Every day that passes on from this is going to be weirder and weirder when it's 3 months in and you don't know this person. So just like go out of your way and like say hello and introduce yourself and ask how their, holidays or their vacation or their weekend was. And I think that goes a long way because it's very, very hard to build strong relationships at work when you don't know people. And so going out of the way to do that makes a huge difference.
Another angle I wanted to talk this through, I'm curious of like how you view this from your perspective is like, because what you've been doing on Dragon's Den and all of this, like within Canada, you have like a celebrity status, right? And so obviously I imagine there's lots of advantages to building a company and different things like that. But from the ability to build a relationship with your team, be, not just the leadership team, but the new entry level BDR that we're hiring or, there's certainly that moment of like, wow, like I see her on, my mom knows who she is. Like if I brought her to the office, she'd freak out. Yeah. So you being very self-aware of that, what are things that you think through on, and how do you manage your, interaction with the team so that you're able to break that ice with someone so that they can kind of leave their starstruck thing quickly. And we're just like, hey, we're here just like anyone else, like just like you and I have known each other for a number of years.
Totally.
How do you approach those things?
I mean, I think it's my job to always like make the first move and to let people know that like, there is, I certainly have like a presence on TV and you've seen me in that way, but like, I'm a really down to earth person that's fundamentally a founder at my core. And and, sharing some of those early stories. I don't forget what it was like in those early days. I do not forget my first job. I remember at one of my first jobs, my boss didn't say hello to me in the morning. And I was like, what is wrong with you? You walk in and you don't say good morning. And now I can see it. Sometimes I'm just in my own world and I'm late for a call and I'm running through the office and I don't say good morning. And I remind myself, I'm like, no, Michele, you have to go out of the way. You have to go out of the way to make sure people know you, to make sure you're down to earth, to share things that are still vulnerable and scary and all the things that you're feeling, because I think that's just your job. And then if you don't do that, there's actually a far greater consequence to that, because what happens is people lose the ability to trust you because they're scared of you. And then you lose your most important data feed in a company, which is what are the internal problems. And I think that's really, really important as you scale, is that you have people that are not afraid to tell you. And building a culture where when things go wrong, it's not the end of the world. It's just there are problems and you need to solve those problems. That's it. And then, making sure that when people bring me problems, I do my very best and my very quickest to solve those problems, to show that there shouldn't be any fear in doing that.
Mm-hmm. I want to pivot.
But look, it's a work in progress. I don't think I'm perfect at this. I don't think anyone's perfect at this. I'm sure there's people here who are like, oh, I haven't got to talk to her or something like that. I really try my best, but it's an imperfect art.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to get quickly into tactics. We're supposed to talk about tactics, I guess. And the superpower that you seem to be most known for at the company is negotiation. And so maybe I'm asking you to divulge your secret powers. But I'd love to understand, it's probably we'll start at kind of my favorite way to frame this is, before Clearbanc was Clearbanc, before any entrepreneur, we're all used to operating with no leverage.
Yeah.
So probably the biggest change I've noticed coming here, it's the first time ever in my life that I feel like I'm negotiating with any realm of leverage at all.
Yeah.
I think that's one thing I still haven't clicked. And in the back of my head, I'm like, when is this thing gonna blow up and die?
Yeah,
I'm in survival mode all the time. And this thing is going so well that it's you don't have to fear that as much as I'm used to. So I would think back, not so much how you negotiate today, because you have, so much more leverage points, but back when you're either selling your company to Groupon or when you're kind of close your first caviar sale, what are I guess tips or tactics you can think about that have worked for you when negotiating when you have no leverage?
Yeah. So I first would challenge you. You always have leverage. I know it feels that way. I know it feels like you are small and they are big. But at the end of the day, you can never take that mindset. You have to always take the mindset, I have something to give to this person. So the first thing, and it's related to negotiation, because the first thing in negotiation is credibility really matters. And people like to do deals with people that they like as well. And so I don't expect, and I never expect, even to this day, even with a celebrity profile, anyone to know who the hell I am. Really, I, at every single meeting, introduce myself. And I don't expect people to have read about me. And every time I do this, and every time I've done this since I was 18 years old, I want to tell people an amazing story. Because people remember amazing stories. You can tell people 25 facts, and 2 days later, they're only going to remember how you made them feel and the story that you told them. And so everyone has an amazing story. And they have an amazing story of something that they've done. And so if you start off every meeting and interaction like that, it really, really can change everything. So, I remember, even when I was, in university, it's I was an engineer. I figured out that I wanted to build a sustainable company. And I thought that, why don't you take a high margin business like coffee and see if you can make it totally sustainable? And then built this tea room, and, now it's still there 11 years later. And that was my story. And it was I'm an entrepreneur and you can do this. And so even though I'm I don't know, what am I now? 21 years old, I have a story on something that people can remember me by, and some credibility behind that. And so then that story just kept evolving. And every single time I'm never afraid to share my story, share how scrappy I'm willing to be, share how committed I'm willing to be to make something successful. And so I think that's the first thing. Because even when it feels like I'll give you another example, even when it feels like you have no leverage with a big company. Big companies have a lot of things. They have a lot of resources. They have a lot more people. They have, deeper relationships. They have better abilities to partner with people. but big companies don't have speed. And so then you have to use that to your advantage. I mean, one of the great stories that was from the early Clearbanc days is, I remember, Uber was looking for a provider to do this product. And we got on the phone with them and they're like, oh, let me tell you about it. It would be a website that would be called something like this. And, this is what the drivers would be able to do to acquire them and blah, blah, blah. And we were like, oh, cool. And I remember we were in a bake-off it was us, which is, there were 6 of us in an apartment at this point, top 2 or 3 US bank and one of the Silicon Valley unicorns. This is who's competing for this deal at this point. And I remember
provide financing for Uber drivers.
Yeah. I remember we got off the call and we're like, okay, well, let's just build the product. And so we literally bought the domain they were talking about. We threw up a landing page. We built, a 2-step process that the whole thing wasn't fully baked. And we sent them back an email 24 hours later. And they're like, we said, is this what you're looking for? ? And a link to the website. Imagine that. The other companies hadn't even responded to do a time for the call. And here we were, we basically built call it 65% of the product that they were looking for. That's the example of you cannot think of yourself as not having leverage. You have something that cannot be done, which is the ability to move fast. And so I think when you think about it that way, those would be my first 2 tips, is that you always have credibility and you can never not tell your story. You should never walk into a room and expect people to know who you are. That's just dumb. You should always be willing to share an amazing story and break the ice, and then ask someone else what their story is. Find those mutual connections, build those points of likability, actually genuinely care about someone else's life. Because we meet tons of people in our business life, and some of them become wonderful friends as a result of that.
That makes sense. Well, kind of finishing off, I'd love to kind of take a more macro step back. And, the origins of Clearbanc is it started in San Francisco. You went through Y Combinator, but here you are today building a massive company with, billion-dollar massive aspirations and beyond in Toronto.
Yeah.
Walk me through the decision. So you finished Y Combinator. Yeah. You're still in San Francisco. What made you say, you know what, we're going to move back to Canada to build this business versus where arguably all the best engineers are in the Valley, all the capital's in the Valley. Yeah. Why come back here?
I think it was important that we had roots in Silicon Valley, that we really understood what it was like to build a company there. And I'm incredibly grateful for that experience. But what was happening is we were finding great Canadians and moving them down to the Valley. And, at some point we're like, look, we have a great recruiting advantage in Canada. This is our home. I absolutely love it here. And something really special is happening in Toronto now that hasn't happened in other places. And in competitive markets, it's very, very difficult. I don't think there would be a way that you would say that we've maintained culture to 200 people if we were ever in one of these hot markets. Because the average tenure of people is, 6 to 8 months. People can't even remember what the early days were like. Everyone just remembers the days where we had unlimited free snacks, which is not very long. And so I think that Canada has just incredible talent. It has people that want to work hard, that are not cocky, that are really excited to build, but is now seeing some of this incredible global ambition. It's also been one of the most diverse cities in the world for the last 20 years. And that comes together in a way that's so organic and so powerful. And so I think that's always been that's been a huge draw for us.
And so we can finish off two short questions. Let's think about just this year, because thinking any further is too long for us. What do you hope to accomplish this year with Clearbanc? What does Clearbanc look like end of 2020?
Yeah, I think we want to build a global company this year where every founder that has a dream can get funded way easier. And we can be, the most affordable growth capital for founders around the world and enable so many new ideas to take flight that maybe wouldn't have made it.
And so outside... And,
so really small ambitions.
Yeah, little. And so maybe you'll say, I don't have time for that. And maybe that is your bucket list item to do that. But let's take professional company building aside.
Yeah.
What's something that's, on your bucket list that you want to explore, you want to see, you want to try, at some point in the near future that excites you, that, when Clearbanc is a massive business and you want to take, maybe 2 weeks off.
Yeah.
Next holiday, what does that look like? What's on your bucket list?
What's on my bucket list to try? There's a lot of things on my bucket list to try. I've always wanted to learn how to fly a plane, so that's on my bucket list. What else? I really like, cell phones are a part of our life and are important, but I really like unplugging. So I want to do a couple of hikes where I have no cell phone reception, which seems super scary because also like you're hiking and you might get lost and then like you might really need Google Maps at that point.
Proper survival.
But it's like proper survival. I think that I have a lot of desire to do more off the grid stuff just because I grew up in Alberta. Like there's a huge part of the outdoors that's, in my genes. And I think I'll probably do more writing. Those will probably be the three.
Amazing. Well, we're up on time. So thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us and being part of this. And thank you for having me here as part of the team. I'm excited to help you accomplish that this year.
Well, we are so excited to have you. You're a star.
Thank you so much. Well, great day. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning into LaunchPod. We're so proud to be part of this community doing such great things to move our country forward, but our reach only goes as far as your support. So please download and subscribe to amplify the voices doing the hard work to advance Canada's entrepreneurial ecosystem.